Good morning. Hello. Good morning and welcome to all of you. This is the 11th conference that has been sponsored by the I. Donald Turner Chair in Affordable Housing and Urban Policy at the University of California at Berkeley. This is the third conference in 3 years on energy use in the economy that we've sponsored. As many of you, most of you already know, it's been widely estimated that acts to conserve energy in the design and use of buildings provides the highest payoff of all energy conservation measures. Indeed, it's been estimated that some energy-saving investments in building provide gross savings to the economy and to consumers. The first two conferences on energy efficiency that were sponsored by the Berkeley Program on Housing and Urban Policy, undertaken jointly with Maastricht University, were devoted to commercial and to office buildings. Today's discussion takes on the residential sector. If you think about it, designing and promoting energy efficiency in housing is just more complicated by its very nature than energy efficiency in commercial buildings. Variations in household demands for energy use, not just 60 degrees for efficiency in offices, but demands of households with old people, with children, with those who use housing intensely, may vary quite a lot over different households that are superficially similar. In the residential sector, prices for energy choices are not evaluated by experienced building managers, but rather by homeowners and in many cases individual tenants. Recognizing and promoting energy conservation is a tough job, but the payoffs, as we are told, are long-term. The issue of conservation and the energy use of housing is also inherently interdisciplinary, and that's reflected strongly in the program today, which reflects contributions of designers as well as engineers, developers as well as builders, innovators, behavioral economists, and as well as professionals with a healthy dose of practical real-world experience in this business. We have representatives with great experience in the state, local, and national policy arenas with regard to housing, with regard to urban development, and with regard to energy use and conservation. This promises to be an interesting day, one in which each of us can learn from the ideas and the experiences of those with somewhat different backgrounds concentrated on similar problems. I should also hasten to point out that this is the first of 3 conferences on various aspects of urban sustainability to be held on the Berkeley campus this year. This series, under the leadership of Jennifer Walsh, Dean of Berkeley's College of Environmental Design, includes a conference devoted to sustainable economic development strategies in November, and another day devoted to the mobility of cities, technology, and policy in February. We are grateful for co-sponsorship of these events to a great number of contributors. Besides the College of Environmental Design and the Berkeley School of Law, the co-sponsors include Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy, University of California Center for Energy and Environmental Economics. We also acknowledge the financial sponsorship from the California Public Utilities Commission. And now let me introduce Jennifer Walsh, briefly, Dean of Berkeley's College of Environmental Design, for some brief words of welcome. Jennifer?
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to welcome you today here at the Conference on Energy Efficiency in the Residential Sector. This day-long event, which was so capably organized by John Quigley and Larry Rosenthal, as John mentioned, part of a three-conference series on urban sustainability. And all of the conferences are supported, financially supported by the TED and Doris Lee Fund. So we're really pleased to be able to utilize those resources to have this kind of exchange over the course of the year. The 2 other conferences are organized by the Institute of Urban and Regional Development at the College of Environmental Design and also the University of California Transportation Center. And I would like to just publicly thank the leaders of those centers, Rob Cervero and Karen Chappell, for taking on this task. And one of the things I should mention is that as a result of this conference and the other two conferences, we will be producing policy briefs summarizing the discussions and the key points and potential action strategies. And for that, I'm going to, in advance, thank a group of very talented graduate students. As John mentioned, buildings are a major source of carbon emissions and play a central role in climate change. And I think we're all here in part because interest in energy efficiency and zero net energy building technologies and designs has soared. And indeed, here at Berkeley, units such as the college's Center for the Built Environment, the College of Engineering and its Department of Mechanical Engineering, for example, the Energy and Resources Group, and of course Lawrence Berkeley National Labs have led the way in reducing energy consumption on both construction and operations. And one thing I might just mention for those of you who are not tuned into what's happening on the Berkeley campus, we've just recently created a new institute, the Berkeley Energy and Climate Institute, under the auspices of the Vice Chancellor for Research, Graham Fleming. And this is a major strategy to pull the many activities ongoing on the university campus and the lab together and harness all of that intellectual effort. Some of the work that is really interesting and ongoing around energy efficiency in both residential and non-residential buildings includes the test bed facility at LBNL, which is a DOE facility designed to look at different design strategies and look at how they perform. And we also have a lot of work ongoing in the college, for example, specifically on how to understand occupant behavior and comfort. And this is really vital, particularly, as John mentioned, in the residential sector, because if people aren't comfortable, you know what they do. They go and turn up the heat or turn on the air conditioning and or turn up the lights if they think things are too dim. And so occupant behavior is really important, just as design and materials are important as well. Now, it's one thing to think about energy efficiency in office buildings and other kinds of commercial building types. The residential sector, I think, is much more challenging. We're seeing the adoption of alternative energy strategies for single-family homes, although, of course, it's slow and still relatively small in terms of market share. But I think most critically, and one of the things I'm really pleased to see about today's session is that we're starting to think about the multifamily sector, and in particular, affordable residential units, multifamily residential units. And I think the challenges here are really enormous, but very, very critical. We need to figure out how to design and retrofit multifamily housing both to lower utility costs and rents and boost energy efficiency. How do we do that? What policies and programs might fuel the spread of green residential, not only in upscale housing developments, but also affordable communities? And also, how can we think about this in what is clearly a very troubled economy? So I think today there's going to be a lot of rich discussion, hopefully stimulating ideas, and as I mentioned, a set of policy briefs that hopefully captures the key ideas and disseminates them to not only to our audience here today, but policymakers, decision makers, developers, and others that can forward this agenda. So again, welcome to this conference, and I'm delighted to be here to welcome everyone. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Now we move to the first panel of the day, Sustainable Residential Energy Use. Design, Feasibility, and Performance. Chairing this panel is Charles Eley, an architect and engineer with more than 3 decades of experience in energy-efficient design. Charles has written, tested, and reviewed standards for energy use at the national and regional levels and has been the technical go-to person on energy design and energy usage in buildings for decades. I want to introduce the other panel members. Their brief biographies, together with the conference agenda, are available with your conference materials. And now I'll turn the proceedings over to Charles Eley.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone this morning. We've got a great group of people here. Just to lay out the format, each of the panelists will make a presentation of 10 minutes or so, 8 to 10 minutes, and we're going to actually go in exactly the opposite order of the way they're listed in your program. Susan Ubbelohde is going to begin and focus kind of on single-family homes and opportunities there. She'll be followed by Nehemiah Stone, who will focus on multifamily buildings and opportunities. Nehemiah will be followed by Alan Sanstad of LBNL, and then Matt Golden will bring up the rear, so to speak. So Susan, begin. And we're going to, and hopefully this format will leave plenty of time for discussions and interaction among the panelists and with you as well after the program.
So I'm here at the beginning and sort of standing up for the intricacies and complexities of actually designing these buildings that are supposed to work in a particular way.
Looking for my full screen. There it is. There you are.
Okay, good. And want to just talk about what it means to make a house, in this case I'm talking about single-family residential, that actually delivers either very low energy or net zero energy. Let's see, here we are. And I wanted to start, Carl will smile, back in the 90s with a project called Alternatives to Compressive Cooling, which then sort of folded into a zero energy house project. This was a 5-phase research project, first funded and managed by the CIEE and then by the CEC, that looked at developer houses being built in single-family houses in transitional climates with the idea that if we could reduce the air conditioning loads or get rid of them, that we would really help the future of California's energy demand. And we managed over a series of phases, working with 11 research teams from institutions all over California and ending up with Davis Energy Group from Davis, managing the final 2 phases of the project to design and build with Centex and another developer 2 demonstration houses. This one is in Livermore, and then monitor those houses. And we designed the house so that it would look like and sell like a regular house, but perform much better, which had to do with making invisible changes in the house. And then we opened the house on a day when it hit 108 degrees in Livermore for the grand opening. And by great improvements in the building envelope, the way that the slab was disconnected from the exterior, the ducts for the air conditioning being in an insulated attic space, better glass, shading, et cetera, all of the sort of invisible parts of design that are hard to do and cost money and most developers don't want to do. This house performed like this. That red is the outside temperature, and this is the interior house temperature. And it was very impressive. People ran in and out with the doors open on a really hot day, and the house was really, really comfortable inside with 2 tons of air conditioning running it in Livermore. But the lesson that we learned was that at the last minute, it became part of a zero energy house program and had a set of PVs and some solar hot water slapped on the roof. And when the press came to talk about the opening of the house, this was what was interesting to them. And the picture in the paper was actually of the PG&E meter running backwards. It wasn't of the house at all. So we go forward 10, 15 years. We discovered that architects, builders, this is a semi-custom prefab house company out of Arizona, are wondering how they make their houses better. And we've been doing analysis, which tells them two things. One is, where are the opportunities given the design you have? This is places for improvement. These are places where the house is working really well. And how is this house comparing to a typical house in the same place? And so in this case, you see that the typical house is using a lot of air conditioning. This house is not, but there is a lot of heating. This is in Douglas City, southwest of Shasta. There's still a lot of heating that needs to be taken care of because they aren't using passive solar energy yet. The design is early, so we're helping them as they produce houses with local architects get each house tuned. And then when we go to a custom house where we get to use everything that we've learned and teach architects how to do things better, the metrics have changed, and we're beginning to look at how do we make a net zero energy house, not just how is my house more energy efficient. So we start by looking at the site conditions and are there trees that are going to cause problems with the energy generation. This is one of the big issues that's coming up as we move towards net zero. You can see this is a high-end architect, a high-end house. The question they asked us is, what kind of mechanical strategies do we need? This is Los Angeles. It's pretty nice outside. How much equipment do I need to buy? And we've developed a set of analyses which are for every hour of the year, across the months and across the day, so that every dot is the condition of an hour. And so this is the annual pattern of loads on a radiant heating system for this house. And that allows us to say, look at how much cooling you need compared to how much heating you need, for example. This is the climate that we're using, which is airport data plus real data for a cold spell in January and for 2 different kinds of heat storms that we get from published real hour-by-hour data, so that we can run the house through a typical year plus some events. And this is right here, the living room, the living floor, unconditioned, so that here you can see that we're getting up to in the high 80s for a few hours in a summer afternoon, whereas down in the bedroom, there's still cooling in the winter, heating in the winter mornings that needs to happen. But you look at this and you say, if this is my house working unconditioned and this is my comfort level in the house, how many machines do I really want to buy? And then if I do buy radiant heating and cooling, these are the resulting temperatures. And once you look at a chart like this and say, not how much energy am I using, but how comfortable am I going to be and how much machinery do I want to pay for that uses fossil fuels, your decisions change a great deal. So we've come a long ways in asking questions about what the purpose and the criteria of our houses are that we're designing. How am I doing?
You're doing well.
Okay, thank you.
6 minutes. All right, Nehemiah Stone will be the next speaker. Nehemiah's background is mostly in multifamily residential programs, and Susan, any time you gave us, I'm sure Nehemiah would take. So.
Well, to build on that, this is an hour presentation that I cut about half out of, and I'm going to go through fast enough that you should reach down beside your chair there and grab your seatbelt and fasten it, because we're going to move really fast here.
So you can see where
yeah, but you got to start it at -2. I got a handicap. So one of the things you're going to hear from a lot of the speakers later in the day is how to deal with a lot of the energy efficiency issues in multifamily. I think it's still extremely important to help convince people that there is a reason to, it's important, it's an underserved area, and we need to pay more attention to it. Almost a third of our population lives in multifamily buildings, and when you take a look at the urban centers, it's a lot higher than that. In San Francisco, that's actually an overestimation. It's only 69.6%. But you know, we're talking about 4.5 million people in California that live in multifamily, and our code has only just recently, in the last 2 iterations, even started looking at what the impact of the residential standards are for multifamily. People in multifamily housing spend more of their monthly income on utilities than the average household does, by far, about 4 times as much. There's a vast number of households that are eligible for LIHEAP, and yet there's not nearly enough LIHEAP money to help out most of those households. I'm not going to read this to you. I'm assuming if you're sitting at this thing sponsored by the university, you can read faster than I can. But there's, the 2 points here are that we're in a different situation in the United States than the rest of the world. Most of our poor live in cities, and the rest of the world, it's just the opposite. And in cities, the costs are higher than they are on average in the country. So the low-income households are facing a worse situation than you would think of on average. And we love to tell people it's your responsibility, and it's your household, you take care of it. But in fact, it's the condition of the multifamily buildings that makes a bigger difference on whether people can afford their utilities than their income does. Oop, too far. This is something that when I make this fact known, most people scratch their heads and go, that can't be. But in fact, on average, people in multifamily housing have higher rates, not just higher bills, higher rates than people in single family. And this is largely a function of the fact that most multifamily is in urban areas, and most of the urban areas have higher utility rates. So we're not just subjecting them to buildings that need more energy to make them comfortable, but higher rates. The cost of energy has increased a lot faster than most things in the budget of people in affordable housing, people in multifamily housing. It's increased higher than, faster than the cost of the housing itself. In fact, in the last year and a half, the cost of housing on average has gone down by 0.4%. The cost of energy has gone up by 3.2%. During the period for which I can get from the U.S. Department of Labor good, solid data, 2003 to 2006, the cost of shelter rose about the same as the consumer price index, while the cost of utilities rose at 15% faster. All of that was pretty much about how it affects the tenants. Well, how does it affect the local community? If you spend $1, if somebody in a multifamily building spends $1 on their utility bills, 72 cents of that leaves the neighborhood. You have 28 cents that remains local. If you spend it on the average market basket of goods, for example, in the example here is the barber, 75 cents stays in the neighborhood. So by the time I don't expect you to see all this. I've got 2 dense slides. This is one of them. By the time that dollar has cycled through to the point where the multiplier effect on the last exchange is less than a penny, we're looking at a difference of almost $2 of impact to the local neighborhood. Now, if you were to invest $25,000 in energy efficiency in multifamily, you're going to get energy savings for the tenants of somewhere between $5,000 and $25,000 per year. Now, the $25,000, 1-to-1, that's in new construction. The way that it's set up in new construction, yes, it costs you for greater energy efficiency, but it's a 1-year payback. For retrofit, it costs a lot more to get the kind of savings that you're looking for. So, we're looking at with the multiplier effect, we're looking at an annual addition of $9,000 to $47,000 to the local economy for the dollar that you saved that household from having to spend on energy. 6.5-month payback. Please show me where I can put my money and I'm going to get a better return than that. Please show me where we can put redevelopment agency money, assuming there are any redevelopment agencies left after the end of the year, where they're going to get a better return on redevelopment. So there's a lot of things going on to kind of improve the situation. You know, let me put this in perspective first. In 1978, we had the first building energy efficiency standards in California. 2005 was the first time that an analysis of how the residential standards actually affect multifamily buildings made a difference in what went into the standards, and multifamily realities were accepted. We have had utility programs since around 1980. The first time we had a multifamily new construction program in California sponsored by the utilities was 1999, almost 20 years later. The first time we had a multifamily performance-based retrofit program was 2 years after that. And this is after over 20 years of programs in California. So things are people are starting to pay attention, but it really is just starting. And what it means is there's a huge backlog of multifamily buildings where people, you know, the architects and the developers thought, hey, I'm building to the best code in the world. I'm building energy efficient, and they weren't, because there were loopholes that made it look energy efficient when it wasn't. CEC has sponsored a program, the California Utility Allowance Calculator, that helps to fix part of the economic problem there, at least for affordable multifamily. That helps to make sure that the developer will get a return on their investment in energy efficiency. If there's no return on the investment, we call that a gift, not an investment. TCAC adopted that model in 2009 for low-income housing tax credits. DOE and NREL are pulled together a stable of 4 dozen subject matter experts and one person who's not an expert but talks like one to write standard work specifications for multifamily retrofits. The idea being that once this is done, any program across the country can say, these are the minimums. If you're going to do an energy efficiency retrofit program for multifamily, you will use these work specs and add local details to them. You're going to hear a lot later today about HUD shifting directions and to provide new innovative support for multifamily. I don't know enough about them to even mention them because it would seem kind of silly with 2 of the people at HUD who are largely responsible for having these innovative things coming along later and presenting them. But the point is that for years, we talked about residential, we thought single family, and we kind of left multifamily out. Over the last 5 years, that's been changing. I've been telling people that I thought I was going to have to work till I was 72 to get to the point where I felt there was enough going on in the multifamily energy efficiency arena that I could retire. I think I could probably retire at 65 or 66 now. So I want to thank you all for the effort that you put in. It's an amazing amount of stuff has started happening, and it's good to see it. There's good news and bad news in that, so I thought I'd leave you at least with a smile. Thank you.
Thank you, Nehemiah. Very good presentation. And next, Alan Sanstad.
I do not have slides to present. Thanks, Charles. If one is an optimist, one could view what's going on in the United States politically these days as the very early stages of what is eventually going to become an earnest national engagement with the role of government, the appropriate size of government, how we think about government programs, government regulations of all kinds, what we should expect of programs, and how we evaluate them. I'd like to, and I think what was going on is, I'll be an optimist on good days, think about that. And I'd like to provide a few remarks about the question of single-family energy efficiency in this light. What we've seen in the last 2.5 years at the federal level as well as more regionally state is, as you well know, an enormous acceleration of programs and resources directed to energy efficiency in general and to single-family dwellings in particular, including retrofits as well as new construction programs. To make a long story short, the The paradigm that is reflected in these programs is primarily that of the large, untapped, cost-effective opportunity for energy efficiency and thereby carbon savings in residential buildings, the barriers to which exploitation of which are primarily lack of information on the part of homeowners about the benefits of these investments, lack of access to capital, as well as a few other things, so-called split incentives, although that doesn't tend to be the big, cited so much in the single-family case as in the residential case. I would like to now put this in a little bit of context. I want to read you something from a National Academy of Sciences review that was published in 1984 on the so-called human dimensions of energy efficiency, reviewing a large body of academic research and programmatic evidence that had been amassed through the 1970s and early 1980s on energy efficiency policies, energy efficiency programs, and consumer behavior, household behavior. I quote, federal energy information programs have proceeded from implicit assumptions about the way information works, and those assumptions are fundamentally wrong. The programs tend to be constructed as if people presented with accurate estimates of, for example, the energy efficiency of different equipment would use this information in purchasing decisions. Even when people act as investors, however, this is not the case. For information to be effective in a decision process, making it available is not enough. Now, that is the tip of the iceberg of what was known 25 years ago. The trial we have been running in the last 2.5 years has been run. It was run in the 1970s. If one looks at documents from the Carter administration, you can find much the same thing that you're seeing now about market barriers, financing, information, and the large potential. There has been a really remarkable failure to recognize and learn from this evidence. And there's a good deal of reinventing the wheel going on now. Now, I think that there are very innovative efforts going on in California, here, as was mentioned in Berkeley, LBNL, at the federal level, to improve energy efficiency programs, to tailor things more effectively, to design information provision and whatnot. And I think these programs are worthy, these efforts, and they will succeed in streamlining, making more efficient, and hopefully helping the spread of the programs we have now. One might hope that it had been recognized, the past had not been forgotten and reinvented, but that's life. But I want to now turn to the role of these programs in carbon abatement. The clear history of energy efficiency policies and programs, when they are effectively implemented and well evaluated, is that they moderate the growth of energy demand. That is true in California. That's been true where it's worked everywhere. The programs do work, but the effects are, in the overall, have been fairly modest, and certainly very modest in comparison to some of the claims that have been made ex ante. So I expect that it's true that the current, what's going on now will help to spread the programs, which is good, and help to moderate national energy demand. There is no evidence whatsoever, and a great deal of evidence against the notion that these programs are going to make a huge dent in US carbon emissions. The orders of magnitude simply do not line up. And so this is why energy policy and climate policy are not the same thing. I think that the way we need to be thinking about energy efficiency programs, including single family, is on the road to comprehensive climate policy in the following sense. The innovations that are going on now with technologies, with information technology applied to energy are all very exciting and important. I think the way to think about them is to set the stage for what is going to have to come if we really are going to grapple with carbon emissions on a large scale. Dealing with the climate problem is going to be very expensive. We don't know yet, and this is a country where we are not willing to pay our current bills, let alone those. So I think of this as part of a larger problem where this is going to have to be dealt with. And the country is going to have to decide where and how it's going to spend these monies. I think that the value of energy efficiency programs and policies going forward, certainly it will make the adjustment to the cost more easy. I think in some cases, the costs ex ante are They're overstated, sometimes they're understated. It's not going to be free, it's not going to so-called destroy the economy. There are going to be costs, and the problem is not going to be solved unless people see the costs and accept them. We are obviously now a very long way away from being able to have this discussion in the country, but I think it's going to have to come. So I would leave you with the thought that going forward, think about energy efficiency and its potential, not in terms of these large savings that are going to somehow appear and pay for themselves. It's instead of putting a part of developing the infrastructure so that we can, going forward, grapple effectively with what is going to have to happen to deal with global climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Matt Golden. I've known Matt for a while. Matt is I guess, an advisor now, founder of Recurve, which is an organization to scale up and try and retrofit homes across the country. He's also been an advisor in Washington on the Home Star program and various other programs. So Matt, we're interested in hearing your thoughts on this.
Great. Well, interestingly, I was going to lead in with a very similar statement around, am I an optimist or a pessimist? Which might give people an idea where I'm headed. But it really has to do with what's in the glass. When people talk about, is it half full or half empty? Are you optimist or pessimist? Well, it depends what's in the glass, I would have to say. So, and I stole that from a great comedian. But I have a kind of a sober view of things these days. I would say I'm a realist, not an optimist or a pessimist. I'm actually a huge optimist. I'm an entrepreneur. You have to be a huge optimist, and I have a complete belief in the benefits energy efficiency can and should bring. I do have some concerns about the path that we're on. I think we need to take a really hard look at reality. I was just listening into an Energy Commission business meeting yesterday, and they were congratulating on the great success of our programs, and I don't see it. I don't understand where I think we need to take a sober look. We have companies, my company, after 7 years and thousands of home retrofits, we made a sober decision based on the numbers that we could not continue investing in this industry, and we are no longer retrofitting homes. This week, it hasn't been fully announced, but Well Home, which is the largest home performance company in the country with well over 17 branches and part of a Fortune 500 company, is pulling out of the market. I don't know any companies that are profitable in this space, period. And in California, there's a study that came out that said that we'd create about 210 jobs with our Recovery Act programs. It was corrected to be 310 jobs for $57.4 million so far deployed in the state of California. We have trained about 1,700 auditors. Right now, there can't be more than 40 full-time auditors in the market when you look at the run rates of these programs, which is about maybe 200-300 retrofits a month. 400 on the safe side gets you about 30 to 40 jobs in this sector, and we just signed a contract to train 1,200 more auditors. If we were running at 50,000 retrofits per year, we would need just over 500 auditors in the state. There's just a big disconnect between reality and our great, wonderful plans and visions for great job growth and energy efficiency, and that disconnect means that in the long run, this isn't actually going to work, is the problem. So that's the pessimist side of things. What I can say I'm policy chair of Efficiency First, which is a trade association for primarily retrofitting contractors. We have contractors in every state. We have a very large contingent here in California, and contractors are up in arms. They're leaving the market. The programs are not working for them. We don't feel it's a very hard time being heard. And there's a real disconnect in the reality that we're in a depression in the construction industry, especially in California. These are people making huge investments. I actually think these are not rational investments when you look at actually the economics potentially, but we're actually, at the end of the day, the big loser could very well be the small businesses that are trying to stand up and do this work on the ground. And it's a really unfortunate situation, and people are starting to feel the pinch, and every additional regulation and requirement that makes life harder is starting to come, people are starting to get angry. So why is it not working, right? So the current construct, we have this great thing, we can do energy efficiency in homes, makes people more comfortable, it saves a lot of energy, it has all these value propositions. Recurve, like I said, we've retrofitted thousands of homes, we have lots of extremely happy customers. Mind you, most of them don't really care about the energy savings. They're happy because they're comfortable. They're not getting nagged anymore by their spouse because their rooms are uncomfortable, whatever. These are their asthma might be a little bit better, they save some energy, that's great, but we're talking about cappuccino-sized savings. These aren't huge numbers. So, I mean, first and foremost, it's the economy, stupid, right? Like, how many people here are putting up large chunks of money to invest in their homes right now? Yeah, it's a few people, but it's far and few between, and we're squarely parked in early adopter land. Like, the joke is, we should look in the driveway, do you have a Prius, and do you have an iPhone? Like, that's our customer. So it's very difficult both on the consumer side, but then the piece that gets neglected is on the business side. There are huge investments that go into ramping up and scaling a business to meet the demand. And it isn't, if the government builds demand, the industry will stand up and be there, because we make rational investments at some level with our money. And this is actually why my company didn't continue investing, is that we could not build a pro forma that said that there was enough rate of return for our investment over time with assumptions that we believed to warrant putting more money into the business. And when you overlay regulatory uncertainty around things like HERS 2, AB 758, et cetera, onto our planning cycles, which are long-term planning cycles as a business, it just doesn't make sense. And I couldn't continue selling it to our investors. And we've raised millions and millions of dollars and put it into this industry. So what's the problem? I mean, the real problem, the underlying problem, is a misalignment of interests. We're essentially asking consumers to put up a ton of upfront money for very uncertain long-term results, right? We do an energy model, and we give people savings calculations. Those are averages. People are going to have wild variations in reality. If we provide financing that actually doesn't defer risk at all, that actually allows people to enter into risk they couldn't otherwise afford, it's not a very rational proposition to the average consumer. At the same time, we're asking contractors to do really high-quality work at great expense with lots of regulation, and we don't see any benefit. In fact, we actually make less money when we do things right, and what we were finding in the market is that our profit margins were decreasing because they were training so many bloody competitors. At the same time, we were trying to do our work, and we couldn't even rely on we had very consistent gross margins for years, and that was eroding because we had competitors in pickup trucks with no overhead that we were competing with in the marketplace, and it was getting harder. And then you look at what's happening with the utility sector, and they're being asked to essentially make investments in something that's cutting into their base demand. It's not a very rational act on its own. And you look at the financial industry and lending institutions, and there isn't really the data. And when they look close at the way we do our energy modeling, they're going to find that on an individual house basis, the variance in our ability to predict savings means that the wonderful low risk that we talk about doesn't really exist on an individualized basis. And we can't aggregate. We're talking about individual consumers. So we have the system where we are bribing the hell out of homeowners, right? And where we are seeing some demand going on right now, it's because they've doubled down the incentives, which is wholly unsustainable, right? Like, literally, they've used Recovery Act money to double the utility incentives, and it starts to work when you get it to $8,000 worth of incentives, right? We're regulating the living crap out of the contractor right now is what it comes down to. It's so expensive to be in this business. The extra overhead, the training, the reporting, all of these things add tremendous expense to the actual business model, which is very difficult to begin with to do right. Then we're basically, and then we're taking the utilities, and essentially we're forcing them with renewable energy portfolio standards and with decoupling bribes, more or less, to invest, and then we're underwriting risk to the lenders, or others, they won't come into the market. The sum of all those things is that we have this extraordinarily expensive system, because we're basically trying to compel every major stakeholder to do something against their fundamental best interests. And when you look at the size of this market, right, in California, if you look at the CPUC long-term strategic plan, to hit those numbers, we're talking about somewhere around $150 to $200 billion to get to 40% in the residential, in just the residential in the residential marketplace to reach those numbers, based on the kind of dollars that it costs to retrofit homes. So this is a huge amount of money, and this money has to be primarily private capital. We can't do $200 billion with a B dollars of investment infrastructure through ratepayer funds, through government funds. That money doesn't exist. I mean, we're talking this has to be private sector capital. It has to at least transition to private sector capital, or we run out of money well before we hit our goals. So that's kind of the overarching bit. We have to figure out how to engage private capital. Now, the interesting thing is that there's kind of this is a really black and white way to look at the world, and I'm actually in the gray, right? But to make it simple, there's kind of two fundamental approaches going on to how we approach this from a policy standpoint. There is this approach that says, well, it worked in new construction. We're going to create a label. It's going to be based on code. We're going to control that label. We're going to force people, whenever we can, over time, to put that label on their house. And then we're going to turn the knob and make them invest in retrofitting their homes. We're going to regulate. We're going to use codes. Worked in new construction in 2004. Mind you, we had 30-year mortgages with 3.5% interest rates, a highly profitable business with a lot of price elasticity, et cetera, in a booming economy, and it worked. Now we're trying to apply that into the residential retrofitting industry, again, which just in California ends up being, we're talking about well over $100 billion of consumer spending. and essentially applying it as a tax on consumers when it comes down to it, the very people who are in their homes underwater right now, the mortgages. And that's one approach. The other approach on the other extreme is this idea that we do have this wonderful resource that we can tap, but we need to align interests. So can we actually get to the place where we can predict accurately the savings that we're going to create, at least if not on an individual house, but on a pool of homes, and actually tie that to actual bill savings? Can we monetize those savings in a forward capacity market, or potentially through decoupling, which is less efficient with utilities? Can we prove the correlation between actual saved energy and lower risk on lending? And can we take the risk off of the consumer? And that's the important piece from driving demand. And that's what we're seeing is working. When we talk about the solar industry is actually working now, is that 47% of all solar installs in California were done with either a solar lease or a power purchase agreement last year, and that's the sector that's exploding. And it's different than finance in the way that we think about it with residential, because we're not asking consumers to finance a project and incur all the risk. Are they actually going to get their 20% savings? Are they going to be the people that get 10% and their neighbors get 30%, right? Do they have to actually sign on the dotted line? Are they going to have to upfront and take all that long-term risk? Instead, in this model, what's working in the power purchasing agreement model, if you look at like a Sunrun or a Sungevity, which does a lease, what they're doing is actually the private markets are coming in. So Energy Upgrade California is great. It's about a $280 million program. Solar City raised $280 million a few months ago from Google, just their one company, and they just signed a deal, I don't know if anyone saw it today, an enormous deal, based on a power purchase agreement with the military to retrofit hundreds of thousands of homes. This is a fundamentally different model. So what we're doing, what's working in solar is they go to a consumer and say, hey, I would like to guarantee your savings, and I would like to maintain your system over time, and it's a no-brainer decision. And that's right. And then what's actually interesting is that it's not the government setting these high standards and rules for contractors anymore, it's actually industry. So SunPower, which is the leading solar installer in California, maybe not anymore as of today's deal with Solar City, but the last year they've been booming. They regulate their contractors because they have they are actually taking responsibility for the savings, or for actually in that case the generation coming out of the systems that they're installing, and they have a responsibility to the capital market. So they do 100% quality assurance, and they have higher standards than the California Solar Initiative ever asked for. But it's so valuable the contractors have to play. So now the contractors are in the value chain. Right? They're not outside of it. They're actually being held responsible for the results. And this package of public policy and tax incentive, which is part of it, obviously, because solar is more expensive, with the certainty around their ability to produce, is actually allowing billions of dollars of private capital to go into project finance in the solar arena. And that's what's driving that market forward. And I think we can do the same thing in residential energy efficiency, especially around heating and cooling. We can go in and we can give people a comfort guarantee with an amount of energy consumption for heating and cooling, tied to an IP thermostat. We can take the risk off the consumers. We can and we can actually build a similar model that that will realign the industry in a much more efficient way, that becomes capitally efficient over time in a way that attracts capital and aligns interests, so that you're not, again, having to bribe everybody to play. And this is something that we should be looking at as a long-term policy objective. My concern actually in California is that we're running in the other direction. We're not listening to industry. We go to these. We sent a letter to the CEC yesterday, and we had contractors talking about how they're not making ends meet, and you're adding and we get nowhere, right? And California really concerns me as someone who's been an investor and been a part of this industry, is that we're moving in a direction away from markets towards a regulatory construct, and I don't see how the numbers work over time. So. But my positive message that I want to make sure, the glass half full part of this, is that I believe that there is such promise in residential energy efficiency that we can follow the lead of solar and other, and also some efficient financing that's occurring on the similar lines in commercial energy efficiency, and really understand how this has to be market driven over time, and understand the drivers that bring private capital to the table and make this work. So,
thank you. Well, thanks, Matt. As I expected, we've got 4 very interesting perspectives on the issue here. We're going to open it up to questions for you, but I'm going to take advantage of my role here in the bully pulpit, sort of, to ask a few questions to begin with. I'm going to start with you, Nehemiah. We have policies in California that require that all new residential buildings be zero net energy by 2020. I guess high-rise residential might fall into the non-residential category at the moment, so maybe that's 2030. But considering the configuration of these buildings and energy efficiency opportunities, from a technical perspective, based on today's technology, is it how feasible is it that we can get to zero net energy for multifamily buildings, and what's it going to cost?
Well, I'll answer your question first, but it's the wrong question. So it's possible. It's not going to happen, but it is possible. It's feasible. We could do it. The technologies are there. One of the things we need to look at is designing buildings so they don't need energy, rather than trying to figure out how we can best get energy efficient using equipment in those buildings and energy on top of it. The reason I say it's the wrong question is I know this conference is about energy efficiency. I'm becoming more concerned about water efficiency. I think that at what we're looking at right now is we can always make more energy. We'll put up more wind turbines. We'll harvest the tides. We'll put up more solar. We can't make more clean water, and we're approaching a critical period with water that I think is going to be much more devastating to our economy and to households than any of the energy disasters we've had in the past. So I think I'd like to see us start turning the conversation away from can we get zero net energy to can we get zero net water, and start looking at how we can impound the water that lands on our property, how we can recycle, get rid of the mental problem about drinking pee, because quite frankly, the cleaning up the water that's in the waste stream is you end up with cleaner, safer water than pulling it out of the ground. So the answer to your question is yes, we can get there, but it's probably not the question we really should be struggling with right now.
Well, I see that later in the day we've got some people from the Energy Commission and CPUC, so maybe they can address these, whether this is the right goal or not. I'll hold off on that for now.
Charles, can I add one
Sure.
thing to that? Related to that, and probably a large percentage of the audience knows this, but I think everybody should know it. The biggest use of energy in this state is for water. The biggest use of water in this state is for energy. And those two are so inextricably linked that it is foolish to pay attention to one without paying attention to the other one.
Good point. Matt, I want to address the next question to you. When you read, economists from Glenn Hubbard on one side of the spectrum to Robert Reich on the other all note that we need to invest more in building energy efficiency. It's our purchase of foreign oil is a negative impact on the gross domestic product. It has huge impacts. In light of last night's Republican debate, is there a story that you could tell to, say, the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party that would convince them to create this regulatory and economic environment that would allow enterprise to take off the way smartphones have or other technologies?
So first of all, I do believe in climate change. So this is actually something I do on a regular basis. I actually find, because I do quite a bit of work in Washington, D.C., and of course these days you don't get anywhere without talking to the Republican side of the aisle. And we do have a number of bills actually that are all being sponsored by Republicans now that are the offshoots of Homestar in the House and the Senate that are at least co-sponsored by Republicans. I don't know if we're at the full wing of the Tea Party. I don't think we're going there. But if you look at like core Republican values, at least traditional core Republican values of market-based systems and kind of this idea that we want to move away from handouts and towards self-sufficiency, I think there's a lot of real core values that speak very well across both sides of the aisle. It's very hard to sometimes to get that message across in the highly politicized world that we live in. However, this is actually something, especially with Homestar, and if people remember, there was two sides to Homestar. There was this like rebate for product side. It was still pretty good. It was high-end products with some quality assurance and whatnot. And then there was the performance-based approach. And interestingly, it was very much that the big business and Republicans lined up on the, really focused on the prescriptive rebates, and kind of, ACEEE and home performance contractors and whatnot were very focused on the performance-based track. And I always thought that was, I don't know if it was flipped as the right word, but guys, don't you see, like, the performance approach is actually how we engage markets over the long haul. These rebates are really handouts that don't get us anywhere, because they're really, you just have to keep funding more rebates, but there's no real economic engine there. So I think we focus, and I just want to be clear with all my statements, that there is a huge public sector role in creating a system for a market to emerge. And no bureaucrats are going to lose their job, because there's plenty of good work regulating that market. Because this is not, I'm not a crazy, there's a big spectrum here. We need to allow market drivers to emerge, but we're not talking about an unregulated, open, free market. There's an awful lot that needs to be done to make sure that it's a fair and open market. So I just think that's the approach, is focusing that if we can turn energy efficiency into a resource that's real, that we can document, that we know that if we can actually generate this demand reduction that hits baseload, and we can also control HVAC systems and create this demand response asset that we can sell right into spot markets, that we should be able to turn that into something that the markets can monetize in a much more efficient way and much more valuable. And Goldman Sachs will make a ton of money at it, right?
Okay. Sure, Alan.
Mayan, I'd like to, I'm inspired by Nehemiah. You asked the wrong question. The question is not how could you get the Tea Party or the Republicans to agree to this, but how could you get the Democrats to create such a system? Okay, the system we have now that Matt and I are commenting on is the Democrat left-wing progressive paradigm, and that's the problem, as I see. And I'd like to elaborate and follow up on something that Matt said. It's a very good example of the divergence from common sense and sort of willful disregard for the facts in some of this. If one looks at the history of single-family residential retrofit back 35 years, and in the early days there was a lot of experimentation, very aggressive R&D type, including many public programs. Perhaps the single clearest outcome found repeatedly is the variation among individual dwellings in how much savings there are ultimately, okay? Even in programs that worked on average, meaning on average the homes did save energy, you still see this variation. It's hardly surprising, but now let's look at what we have, how the regulatory paradigm is set up. It's interesting to think about this from the perspective of cost-benefit analysis. Some of you probably know about this, or economists or whatever. Public policy and regulatory environmental regulations, we think there's often subject to cost-benefit analysis. The idea of cost-benefit analysis is that the benefits outweigh the costs overall, not that there are no costs. Energy efficiency has always been sort of singularly an exception to this, in the idea that there are nothing but benefits to private agents, okay? It's not the public, it's to private, and not just to the private agents, everybody in the economy on average, but to everybody, okay? I mean, every homeowner is gonna make money on this, and it's simply not true. It's obviously not true. And this is a good example of why, because the benefits from efficiency investments pay off, the effects of them are quite variable. So one would think that we would like a system in which this is taken account of. These investments are risky for investors. Like every investment is risky. This has risk too, in part because of this. After almost 40 years of this idea, we still haven't got to that point, okay? Which would go a long way toward facilitating the sort of engagement that Matt was talking about. The point about this, however, now, well, there's several points, but one is you would have to admit that it's not the greatest thing since sliced bread for everybody who does it, which is a big hurdle. And you would also have to admit that it's not going to be the magic key to reducing carbon emissions. Okay? This is one reason why all the big potential estimates are overblown, okay? Because it's not going to work out that well on average. It will work out spectacularly in a lot of cases and not at all in others. And right now, we don't even have a system to reliably figure out the difference in practice and to create regulatory support for markets that would exploit that.
Can I elaborate at this moment?
Sure.
This is actually kind of a favorite topic, but this idea that, overall, on average, and when we talk about utilities, we're talking programmatic numbers. Overall, this is cost effective. This is not cost effective. But when you're on the ground in the current construct, we're talking to individuals. And especially in California, actually, where we're basing everything on what's called an asset model that takes behavior out and compares you to code, the variance is enormous. And I actually know of a study that's happening right now, and it's 50% variance in either direction. That means that I go to you and you give me 10 grand, I'm going to save you 20%. You're going to save 10%. Your neighbor's going to save 30%. You are not happy, right, at the end of the day. Now, the way that you deal with this actually is through insurance products in the market. It's happening in other sectors. Like, we can actually aggregate the risk off of you, and I can guarantee you, and I can insure that risk if I have the data. But we need a lot more accuracy, and we need to dive towards real, not towards regulation.
Can I? I'll make it really short, I promise. All right.
I want to give our audience a chance here.
There's a building performs as a building performs, and we try to figure out what that performance is by three different methods. One is we model it. We build an engineering model and try to figure out how the building is performing. Another is we monitor it. We put data monitors all over all the equipment. Another is we look at bills, and in all of those cases, that is not representative of how the building performs. So those are for different purposes. They are varying substitutes for how a building performs. If we're telling people you're going to get 20% savings on your building, we have to say, assuming that you're an average person, assuming that you're going to use your building the way you normally do. When you're talking particularly about affordable housing, it just isn't so. And I hope that as we start focusing more on multifamily and affordable housing in terms of energy efficiency, we don't set up a false paradigm or false expectation that when we model the building or when we monitor the building or when we, whatever, that you're going to see bill savings that are equivalent to what you really ought to get for actually doing the work. Because, and I apologize to those in the audience that have heard me say this too many times already, people in affordable housing don't buy all the energy they want. In fact, they don't even buy all the energy they need. They only buy the energy they can afford. You fix their place, they have a right to stop dealing with 58 degrees in the wintertime and 90 degrees in the summertime and start being as comfortable as people who can afford all the energy they want. You are not going to get the savings that any model would predict you're going to get because you shouldn't. You're buying comfort as well as with the energy efficiency.
Good point. All right, Susan, I have one question for you, and then we'll open this up. I was fascinated by your graphs that showed how closely we can meet comfort conditions without any heating or cooling systems. One of those examples was Los Angeles. What about New Orleans or Phoenix or even St. Louis? What's the possibilities for passive approaches in those locations?
Once you get into humidity, you're in big trouble. Everybody knows that. Same in Hawaii, right? Which seems like it's paradise until you put on a suit and go to work in a building that doesn't have any operable windows. People lived in New Orleans for a long time before air conditioning existed. And we have changed our demands on people's lives to the point where it's almost impossible to operate without machines in buildings. But there are certainly ways of making buildings use a whole lot less machinery and a whole lot less fossil fuels to run those machines than the way we do it now. And one of the things in humid climates that's very interesting is that if you air condition part of a building, you end up with mold growth between the non-air conditioned and the air conditioned part of the building. So you have to come to some conclusion about whether the whole building will be conditioned or whether it will all be not conditioned. And it's very complicated. And mechanical engineers who've borne the liability suits on this are really skittish. In any humid climate. In California, we've got climates where building the building creates the problem, where you're typically more comfortable outside than inside once the building's built. And the question is how we get back to making the buildings use what's outside. In the other climates, it's about being really, really smart, but not necessarily making sort of small, dark, mean caves that you air condition with the smallest machinery you can find. There are just lots of ways that you can make a building smarter. I think one of the big problems is that it's true with retrofits, it's true with new design, is that the building envelope is where the action is in terms of minimizing the mechanical systems and minimizing the photovoltaics and the whatever brings you to net zero, however you define it, and that the building envelope is expensive, complicated, and not sexy. It's part of that performance. And the big movement in the country right now is the passive house, which basically says your building envelope should be a thermos bottle, and then you use a machine to make sure that your fresh air, comes in. And you collect the heat or the coolth as it goes out. And for a huge amount of the country, that disinclines the occupant and the designer to think about much greater connection to the outside climate rather than separation from. And so I think that the sort of role of the building envelope is complicated and climate specific, obviously, but it is the piece that is the hardest in practice to get a handle on.
Okay. Well, thank you. We have a couple of microphones here, and I think now would be a good time to take questions from the audience, right in the center in the back there.
I could probably do it without a microphone. Not for our videotape. Oh, okay.
Stand up so that I can see you better.
Thank you. Timothy Burrows. I work at the City of Berkeley in the Office of Energy and Sustainable Development. And first, I have a quick plug for some work we're doing, and then I have a question for Nehemiah. Berkeley, Oakland, and Emeryville, the three cities, are partnering right now on a project to estimate the energy-saving potential of existing multifamily buildings in our three cities, and then to develop strategies to help capture that energy-saving potential. We're at the beginning of a 2-year project funded by ratepayer dollars administered by PG&E. So if people have questions about that project, please come talk to me about it. Question for Nehemiah, building on your comment about an investment without a return is not an investment but a gift. So one of the barriers that we're up against a lot in our housing stock, about 50% of which is multifamily, is the split incentive barrier, where we've got individually metered, the overwhelming majority of the units are individually metered. And so the landlord has less incentive to invest in a building where he or she is not going to get the payback on the energy savings. So you could probably write a book about this, but what if you put yourselves in the shoes of that property owner? What is the motivation to make that building more energy efficient if he's not going to get a return on that investment, with the exception of investment in the central systems where he does pay the energy bill? And for a local government representative like myself, how can I tap into that motivation and encourage landlords to invest in their multifamily buildings?
Well, I have two answers. You're not going to like either of them. First answer is the way you stated the question. If the landlord cannot get the return, what's their motivation? There isn't any. So that's the first answer, and no, you're not going to like. Second is that in cities like Berkeley that have rent control, what you can do as government entity, there's two things. One, get rid of rent control, but that's politically not popular in That's politically not popular in the People's Republic of Berkeley. I know that. But the other thing you can do, the California Utility Allowance Calculator was built specifically for tax credit projects where the rent is the gross rent is set, and you can't change the gross rent. It's 30% of what your target income level is for your tenants, but you can change the piece of the gross rent that is the estimate of utility costs. Well, with rent control, you have something very similar to that. And what you can do is, and I've talked with somebody else at Berkeley about this, and with PG&E, who started exploring it a couple of years ago. What you can do is you can set up the same kind of contract, the same kind of quid pro quo, if you will. You know, if we invest in energy efficiency in this building so that you, the tenant, are going to be more comfortable, and you, the tenant, are going to pay lower utility bills, how about sharing that difference with us? Now, we're not going to change the rent, but we'll have an adder. We'll have whatever you want to call it. It's not a tax, it's not a fee, but it's an adder for you're paying for the increased comfort and the better utility bills. Now, if you have problems getting the property owners to agree to go, because that's not going to be an easy sell to them either, having to go through one more contract. Research has shown that investment in energy efficiency changes the property values, and for every dollar that annually that you save the tenant, you're increasing the value of the property by $10 to $25. And so there's a property value.
What research is that?
It's reported in the journal, what's it called? The Journal of American Assessors. ICF did it. They actually pulled together data from 5 different research projects and collated it into one piece. But the other piece is that especially in today's economy, developers, landlords ought to be concerned about rent security. They ought to be concerned about whether their tenants are going to be able to pay the rent next month and the month after. Utilities are the second largest cost of maintaining a household. So if you can reduce the cost of utilities, you increase the rent security. So those are the arguments I would use with the landlord.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, you go.
I have a question for Matt. You paint a very pessimistic picture of the economic elements in this equation. And my question to you would be, have you looked at going after the low-hanging fruit first rather than perfection later on? And as an example, I'll give you I recently worked on a project for the San Francisco Housing Authority, 5,100 units of multifamily housing on which they are in the midst of spending $34 million, about $6,666 a unit. At the completion of that work, they will save about $685 a unit per year in utility costs. That's a workable example. It is not, it doesn't involve solar, it's lighting, it's heating, it's cooling, not that you need it in San Francisco, and water. By the way, they will, for Mr. Stone, they will save 160 million gallons of water in the first year. That's a line of tanker trucks from San Francisco to the Mexico border. It's 3,400 acre feet of water. That's in an acre, 3,400 feet high. That's how much water they'll save in the first year. If we were to address the nation, the entire 70 million households that are eligible for these similar upgrades, the savings would be enormous. Has anyone looked at the economic justification and viability of conducting these projects at to the lower standard rather than the ideal standard?
So I'm not sure when you talk about standards exactly what you mean, but I can say that as a company, we by no means had a Cadillac solution. We basically, the people who are out selling would sell whatever basically a consumer wanted to buy, and we did a lot of projects in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. Our average is more like $10,000 to $12,000. But that's really a split between a bunch of projects that are usually like $6,000, $8,000 and a bunch of projects that are like $18,000 because they involve a whole HVAC retrofit. We still see paybacks that are in the 10-year range on those projects. And again, you're talking about all those numbers you threw out don't really speak to consumers who kind of just, again, so if it's cost effective and you provide a loan and it's a 10-year loan and a 10-year payback, you just didn't save any money, but you went through a hell of a transaction cost to get there, right? That's break even. It's challenging, and we found that our happiest customers were the customers that we went deeper because they actually saw such significant benefits that they tell their friends. And if you do like a basic shell upgrade in the Bay Area, like you save a little bit of energy. We're going to vastly overestimate, if we go through an EUC energy model, we're going to vastly overestimate the real savings because you don't actually use your HVAC system the way the model says you do. So you're not going to get your real savings, and they're going to be kind of diminutive, and you're going to see some small improvements, but you're not going to be telling your neighbors about it really. So I don't know. I mean, we don't see these great paybacks, especially in existing residential in this climate zone in particular. Other parts of the country, it's more beneficial, obviously, but not dramatically.
I understand.
And obviously, the Northeast is the hotbed, but it's still, New York State has an 11-year-old program. They're spending about $2,000 per project in total, all in subsidy cost, and they're still stagnated at about, I think they're doing like 8 or 9 or 10,000 retrofits a year in that program, and they can't really get it over the hump, and they are seeing those paybacks. It's challenging.
Yes, you go next.
Yeah, hi. My name is Mindy Craig, and my question kind of goes. Oh, sorry.
Details.
Sorry. Thanks. You hear that now? Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Mindy Craig, and my question kind of goes a little bit to what Alan and Matt have been saying, and it's the piece of the equation that I think you were just alluding to, which is the consumer. Whether we're trying to regulate it or we're going capital, the consumer sees really no benefit, particularly here in California. They would rather put in glass tile in their kitchen rather than maybe save a pittance on their energy costs, because energy costs here are just not that much. That, to me, is one of the biggest challenges we face. And I'm just curious in terms of that specific element, either Alan or anybody here who has some thoughts there and how we actually change that mindset.
Yeah, so what mindset are we trying to change and why?
Making sure that they understand the benefits of a retrofit. Why should they spend the $15,000 if they can't really make any money savings?
Yeah, why? What's the answer? Why should they? No, I'm asking. What do we need to change? So what's the problem?
They're not going to do it.
Yeah, and that's the right thing, right? Why should they do it? Why should the public pay? I mean, tell me what the problem is.
I think that goes to what you were saying, is there a regulatory and bribing them versus a privatized model, and how do you balance those two with that same thing?
So I see, I don't disagree. When we train people to do sales in this, it's all about, we really looked at it like the first step you do is you surface pain, and then you solve those problems. If a consumer's not having a problem, you can't get them to buy something. So if their energy bill doesn't hurt, you're not going to sell them a solution for their energy bill. Generally, the people who would actually go through with the projects, which is about half the people who we did an audit, would have some subset of my bathroom's always hot, my bedroom's freezing cold, my kid has asthma, and my energy bills seem a bit high. Right, and it's surfacing those pains and solving those problems that actually gets them to do the work. In terms of why I think actually moving towards a private capital model, one is it's just necessary from the amount of money it's going to take, but is it realigning interests is that I believe that what is working in solar from all accounts, and I believe what could work is a fundamental change in the proposition to the consumer around risk, where we're saying, look, we'll come in and we're not asking you to buy a retrofit, make an investment. We're going to come in and we're not going to sell you insulation or duct work. We're going to sell you, look, we're going to guarantee your kilowatt hour and BTU consumption on your HVAC system, and we're going to guarantee your comfort. And we're going to take that risk on for you. And would you like it? And I think that's actually a very different proposition than, here's some low interest financing, which, by the way, we had 5.9% financing that like 7% of our revenue actually took advantage of. Like, again, it wasn't deferring risk. Anyway, but fundamentally.
Can I follow up? With all respect, your question, I think, illustrates a problem, which is the problem is not with the consumer. It's not with their mindset. It's not with, this whole idea of market barrier, okay, it's blaming the consumer, okay? They don't get it. Well, actually, in a lot of cases, they do. Your example is a good one. Those people know that it doesn't make any sense for them to make this investment, okay? There's not a barrier there. There's not a problem to be solved. I would say, well, so let's look at the parts, if I'm thinking again in terms of carbon emissions, okay? Let's look in the parts of the country where actually their energy costs might be higher and or their carbon emissions might be higher, and what do we do there, okay? So for buildings, for example, it really matters how the electricity is generated, okay? California has relatively low carbon, as far as these things go, electricity. In the parts of the country where it's coal, it's totally different. Okay, so the first question I would ask is how about looking in those parts of the country and focusing in on the solutions for carbon, from the carbon perspective, that are regionally appropriate.
I'll make it real short. On average in California, we spend about 4% of our income on energy, and you're absolutely right. Then if you're going to save me 10% of my 4%, why do I care, right? But people in affordable housing spend on average 20% of their income. If you're on Social Security, if you're old and affordable housing, you spend a quarter of your monthly income on energy. They don't typically have the ability to say, I'm going to make that investment because it's not their building. Those are the folks we need to focus on.
Back there.
Hi. Can you hear me? My name is PJ Iyer, and I work for the Silicon Valley Energy Watch program, one of the 19 that PG&E supports. Thank you. And I guess for those of you who aren't familiar with the program, our mission is to educate and outreach, as well as support direct installs and customized retrofits to the local nonprofits, residents, small businesses, the hard-to-reach places. And currently, we are supporting 17 nonprofits in a community energy champions program. And I guess my question to you is, in terms of educating and in terms of talking to residents, if you were in a room full of Spanish-speaking low-income or Vietnamese-speaking low-income individuals who own or live in multifamily housing, usually it's single family with multiple families in the house, which is a different dynamic. But what would be your key messages to them? I know plenty of what we talk about, but I'd really be interested in hearing what you'd have to say.
Oh, to me, okay. What would my key messages be? That's a difficult one. One of the things that I would focus on is comfort and health. There's a I don't remember the report, so I can't give you the specifics, but there's been a demonstrated link between energy efficiency and health, between energy efficiency, obviously, and comfort. So we have many times higher incidence of asthma among children in low-income housing than we do in the average housing, the average household. That ought to be of primary interest. Another reason that comfort and health is a reason, and something I've talked to them about, is that when we take a look at the households across the board in California, most households have some sort of health insurance, and they have jobs where if they're sick, they still get paid. In affordable housing, that's often not the case. You have they have jobs where, if you're not there, you don't get paid, and even if you do, the job does not come with health insurance. So health is a bigger economic issue to the community in affordable housing than it is in the population at large. I hope that answered your question.
Question in the center up there.
Hi. Is this on? I just had I
like the exchange between Alan Sanstad and the questioner over here, and also the comments about bringing private capital to bear. And it seems to me that a fundamental problem here is that the private costs don't reflect the social costs of energy consumption. And really, it's a matter of we're not pricing energy. We just have this fundamental misalignment between our incentives as individuals and our incentives as a collective. And so maybe if you guys can comment on that.
Yeah, well, I would have to say yes. And Nehemiah just mentioned it's more true with water, which I totally agree. So, I mean, I think that I'm just going to leave it. There's some really big structural problems in the system that we have created. We don't really have a market for energy. It's a system that's we've kind of created as as a society through our regulatory systems. And if we want to actually make this work, we have to address some of the issues like how we price energy, who implements these programs, how we pay, how we gauge cost effectiveness is an enormous issue. With the fact that there's a lot of like structural, very painful, very hard problems that underpin this broader issue that we're having that need to be addressed, and it's going to be hard.
Yeah, that is one of the fundamental points, right? And the issues, as I was saying before, the problem, that's the problem to be solved. What we're looking at, however, is in my remarks before, the idea that there's no difference between the private and social benefits. Okay, I mean, that distinction is fundamentally the whole point of this paradigm is erased when you're talking about market barriers and the lack of access to capital. Is that it's actually in people's private interest to do these things, and they would if they understood it. Okay, sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. There's a lot of heterogeneity, but erasing, ceasing to erase that distinction, I think, is one of the first hurdles that has to be overcome. In the 1970s, pricing energy according to the externalities, I think that's a good idea. A lot of people think it's a good idea. In the 1970s, the point was raised that however, there are reasons that people there are barriers to people responding to price signals, even if they were there. And I think one thing that is different now, or is becoming different, is that, to my mind, when I was talking about infrastructure, information technology, advanced metering and so forth, the smart grid and whatnot, is that a lot of those barriers will be mitigated or we're moving toward a point where people can actually see exactly what they're paying for energy, what they're paying, what they're getting from it. And so inevitably, I think, it's not a panacea, but carbon is going to have to be priced. And I think what I meant by putting in some of this infrastructure having to do with energy efficiency and information technology is going to ease the way for the price signals to work more effectively.
I just wanted to add, I totally agree. And that's actually one of the, I think we're in a place where we need to reevaluate some of these things, because a lot of the policies that we are carrying forward right now were created in a world where we had to create regulatory systems to approximate market forces because we didn't have things like transparency in the marketplace. And now those things are emerging, and we need to look at the plans that we've been rolling out for the last 30 years and adapt.
Art Rosenfeld once said that currently energy is dirt cheap, and that means we think of it with the same respect as dirt. If we want to make a difference, we got to kick people in the wallet. That's how it's going to make a difference. If we price in all of the costs, all of the avoided, what are currently avoided costs, into the price of energy, a lot of the rest of this goes away. It becomes very cost effective to invest in energy efficiency at that point.
My name is Marianne Wolf, and I'm a housing consultant and a housing commissioner for the city of Berkeley, and I'm a pragmatist. And we're talking about multifamily, and I'd like to hear the distinction made between condominium ownership and rental ownership, because what you've got with your condominiums is you could see direct savings on your bills, perhaps, but if you have just a portion of the units doing the retrofit and not the entire building, you may not have the same kind of efficiency. So I'm sure you've thought about it.
I'll pass. If you're putting that out as a question, Charles, I'll pass.
Makes sense. Next question.
She wants an answer. All right. So I'll make one up on the fly here then. I don't think of condominiums really as anything different from attached single-family homes. I mean, that's all they really are. They're attached single-family homes. And to the extent that you are aware of the what you buy into when you buy a condo, you should understand the degree to which you have control over the space and the building that confines the space. And if you're in a homeowner association, take charge of it and essentially get to the point where, as a whole, the homeowner association realizes the advantage of investing in energy efficiency. Because if you're a condo owner, typically in California, you own the space between the walls. You don't own the walls themselves, and so you can't make that choice to insulate them, to replace the windows, do those things, unless it's as a whole. It's not the same situation though where you have a landlord and a tenant. The tenant pays the bills, the landlord owns the building, and the landlord makes all the decisions. It's similar to that. It's closer to that than it is to detached single family. But if your bills are enough, or your discomfort is enough to make you concerned about it, then get on the board of the homeowners association and push the issue until you win.
I'd like to maybe respond to that question as well in the context of renewable energy sources. The current CPUC and IOU rules are all on a per meter basis. The IOU won't buy back more than you actually use. What we need in the case of a condominium, though, is we just need 1 meter. That's the PV system, the common PV system for all of the units. That's only going to run back into the grid. And so we need to change our PUC policies or IOU policies about that, so that you can basically look at all of the utility meters in the association together, including one that serves the PV system. And I think that's a structural problem that should be easy to fix, but it hasn't yet.
It is being fixed. It's called virtual net metering, and it was originally just applied to MASH and to NSHP, to the multifamily affordable solar home program and the new solar home partnership program. But it's now being expanded. Kathy can probably answer this better than I can. It's being expanded out to Kathy Fogel from the PUC. It's being expanded out, to put you on the spot here, it's being expanded out to other multi-tenant situations, but it's being done gradually so that the lessons learned from the smaller operation can be applied to the other. But virtual net metering is exactly what you said. You meter the PV system, and you allocate the energy from that across all the other meters according to an agreement up front.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll have a morning break.
You folks, my name is Louis Raskin. You folks have answered it a little bit just recently, but to clarify, and so what goes to Nehemiah, I think there's been a move to try to have distributed solar, especially in the commercial sector. If that was applied to the multifamily sector, where again so much of their bill is being, so much of their income is being eaten up for energy costs, a larger percentage. Also, I was surprised at the number, 31%. I would think over time in California that is going to grow for a lot of reasons. Do you see that working at all to either mitigate the costs of their energy usage and also significantly contribute to energy savings in some way? And again, I realize you have to add what Charles just mentioned into the equation.
If we're talking about getting to zero net on existing multifamily buildings, there's absolutely no way we're going to get there on a lot of those existing buildings without getting credit for PV elsewhere. Buying into SMUD has a program right now where it doesn't matter where the PV is, you're buying into that system to get credit for it. Quite honestly, a lot of in most of our multifamily is in cities. In cities, land's expensive, and so most of the multifamily in the cities is multi-story. And if you just do the math and you figure out what the energy needs are for that many dwellings with that much roof space, you're not going to retrofit to zero net energy without counting energy that's being produced, renewable energy that's being produced off-site. You can do it with new construction with building integrated PV, but for retrofits, we're not going to get there without counting that.
Well, I want to thank our panelists this morning. And